Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is about to begin. Please welcome Semafor's GM and Global Head of Public Affairs, Bennett Richardson.
Morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you all so much for being here. It's great to have you all back after the summer for the first of a huge slate of Semafor live journalism programs this fall. I'm Bennett Richardson, our General Manager and Global Head of Public Affairs. We're sitting here in Washington, but in just 2 years, Semafor has built newsrooms here in Washington and in New York, in San Francisco, in London, in Africa, and now in the Middle East. We'll be launching Semafor Gulf in about 2 weeks. You can sign up for that now. We're really excited about expanding our journalism to that just transformative region. And since day one, Semafor's goal and their mission has really been to provide leaders like you all with intelligent and transparent, independent journalism in an increasingly polarized news environment. We're really trying to change that. And Semafor has really established itself as a global news leader. More than 700,000 subscriptions to our newsletters today, thriving live events business like the program that you're here to hear from today. We convene these events every week across business, technology, policy here in Washington and around the world. Today's program will explore how social media shape the choices that young consumers make and the ways which policymakers are trying to regulate those platforms. You'll hear from top government policymakers, industry leaders, and a governor who's taking a different approach to setting guardrails for social media platforms. Before we get started, I want to thank our partners at Philip Morris International for supporting today's live journalism. We wouldn't be here today without their support, so we appreciate that. And it's my pleasure, before we get started, to introduce PMI's JB Simcoe, who's going to bring up our first conversation. So JB, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Bennett, and thank you all for being here. We're really pleased to be the lead sponsor and partner for today's event. It's a highly relevant and timely topic that is especially important for those of us in regulated industries. And our hope for today is that we have some great conversations that lead to new ideas and new approaches. Philip Morris International and our U.S. affiliates are involved in a highly regulated industry. We're phasing out our cigarette business. We are focused on developing smoke-free products. So these are products that don't burn tobacco. They're a much better choice for adults who continue to smoke if they don't otherwise quit altogether. Our top product in the U.S. is a nicotine pouch. Now, these products are federally mandated at a minimum age of 21 for purchase. And the FDA has oversight over these products. So we have to file for applications for pre-market authorization for all new smoke-free products in the US. Part of this scientific assessment looks at access prevention and the potential appeal for these products to those under the age of 21. So underage access prevention is a part of the regulatory framework, and it's also a part of our culture at PMI. It runs through every part of the business, from product development to marketing to sales. And so these are the areas that we can manage in order to manufacture and sell our products responsibly. So for example, we do not use social media influencers. We use independent age verification before you can enter a branded website. Now, there are other things that we don't control, and that's really the topic for today, such as inappropriate user-generated content on social media. These are areas where collaboration is needed. Other stakeholders have a role to play. And we wanted to explore this intersection of regulated products and social media, and that was really the genesis of the topic for today. We are excited to have Dr. Scott Gottlieb with us today. We invited him to be a part of our partner session. Dr. Gottlieb is a physician, and he was the 23rd commissioner of the US FDA. He's a resident fellow at AEI, a partner at the venture capital firm New Enterprise Associates. He's a CNBC contributor and has an extensive bio of boards and other accomplishments. He's here today with us through the Worldwide Speakers Group. So we're really pleased to have Dr. Gottlieb. The discussion is going to be moderated by my friend and colleague Keegan Lenahan. Keegan is the head of our Washington, D.C. office. She's a vice president of external affairs, and in a former life worked with Dr. Gottlieb at the FDA, holding several senior positions there. So we look forward to a great day of conversations, new approaches and new ideas, and I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Gottlieb and Keegan to start things off. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, JB, and welcome everybody. We're so happy that you could join us today. Thank you to Semafor for hosting us, and thank you, Dr. Gottlieb, for joining. Clearly, this is a topic of conversation that's very relevant, something that we deal with every day with our products. So I just wanted to kind of kick it off and talk a little bit about when it comes to social media, what are some of the things that you'd like to see social media companies or others do to help protect youth from accessing products that they shouldn't be able to see?
Yeah, look, I think when you think about the content and thinking about through the FDA lens, there is the sort of sponsor-generated content, sponsor-generated advertising that may take place on social media. I think there's things that are in the gray area, which is sort of the organic content that sponsors aren't engaged in generating but are involving their products. And then there are things that are clearly, I think we all can agree, over the line where social media sites should be taking a more aggressive role because it's dealing with illegal activity online. With respect to the sponsor-generated content, and obviously some of the context here is tobacco products, by and large, from my standpoint, when we were at FDA, there were certain anecdotes where we knew sponsors were engaging in advertising through social media, where they were promoting their products in ways that, frankly, and now in retrospect, were clearly violative. And it happened on occasion. There were only a handful of those instances, but FDA has a very robust regulatory toolbox to regulate the advertising that sponsors engage in. And I think the best way that the agency can impose those regulations and that oversight is making sure that these products are cleared and approved. And as you know, because of the complexities of the regulatory process and the huge backlog of thousands of applications that the agency has, a lot of these alternative nicotine delivery vehicles and these alternative products have not been approved, cleared by FDA. And I think that limits their ability to step in and impose the oversight that they have within their legal authority. On the things that are clearly over the line, and you and I worked on this when we were at the agency, I'm thinking in particular about some of the opioid advertising that was happening online at the time. And this has gotten a lot better, but back in 2017, 2018, when we first started working on this and you convened the work groups on this, there was a lot of opioids, and these weren't opioids, they were counterfeit products, illegal products being advertised as Vicodin, Percocet, but they were really pressed fentanyl, that you were able to find on the surface web. You didn't need to search very deep to find this advertising, and it was being pushed through a different medium. And we convened some roundtables, got the social media sites to agree to come to FDA, and had a number of open discussions with them about steps that they could take, voluntary steps that they could take to try to reduce some of this activity online. And I think that has clearly improved. It's very hard, and if you type in opioids now online, you get a whole bunch of self-help advertising. I don't think that what the FDA did at the time was the only reason the circumstances improved, but I think it contributed to that, and I think it certainly started the public discussion around what the social media sites could be doing voluntarily to address some of this violative material. And they were fairly motivated to do that. I think it was a question of trying to create a neutral forum where they can have that discussion, and you were able to agree upon sort of a common set of practices and steps that they were all take. And that was very important, doing this in a collective fashion,
Right.
so that you weren't just individually trying to browbeat or impose regulation on individual social media sites. And so I think that was a good model for how you can galvanize action in this space. And that gets to that third category of the organic content, where there's content online that the algorithms are making accessible to the kids, either deliberately or more likely inadvertently, because the kids are influencing their own algorithms, where the sponsors aren't responsible for it. I think by and large, the sponsors don't want it there, particularly in the tobacco realm, because it's both a regulatory and a political liability for them. But it's not so over the line like opioid advertising, where there's really sort of that collective action to try to do something. And there I would just say, when you look at the different social media sites, particularly with respect to the parental controls, and I have young kids, and so I've gone into all these sites and programmed them, there's a lot of things that are being done at an individual site level that I think are highly effective in terms of parental pairing that TikTok's doing, being able to put age controls on some of these sites, and influence the algorithm, being able to report violative things when you see them. I think we could benefit in that realm. I think government regulation would be problematic here, because my concern would be that it would create both a floor and a ceiling on what companies would do. And I think there's probably some companies that would like regulation, because then they can say, look, we're regulated, this is what we're required to do, this is what we're doing. But I think this is one realm where there's a lot of innovation. Technology is going to be a real tool here, things like AI filtering. But it's hard to access these controls when they do exist. Different sites are doing different things. And I think this is a place where we could benefit from some kind of broader convening. Maybe the FTC becomes the locus of this, to try to say, hey, these are the tools that are being used. How can we create a common set of standards? How can we make sure that this is uniformly accessible to parents, that parents are properly educated on this, that you don't have to go to each individual site to do it, and it looks different and feels different. And maybe even think about, when we had this discussion beforehand, ways you can do it at the level of the phone, where when you program a phone, when you go into the iPhone and you set it up for a 14-year-old and put in place parental controls in that phone, can you opt in to have the fact that this is a 14-year-old's phone transmitted to the social media sites, so then they know that these controls have been called for, asked for. So I think that there are ways to set up a better uniform architecture, similar to what we did on opioids, where the sites come together and agree to adopt certain common standards.
Well, as you remember, it wasn't easy to get them to the table in the first place.
It was not easy,
So, what is government's role then? Since you took an active role at FDA, where do you think government needs to be, since this is such a conversation in Washington on how to address this problem? What does that look like?
Yeah, what I worry about is that because we're seeing such a patchwork of regulation now, and we've been down this road before, we have states take individual regulatory action in the FDA space, not in this space, but in a lot of other spaces, where the companies then come to you and they say, we want federal standards, because we can't deal with this patchwork of regulation. And I think that we're at a tipping point right now where you could see the social media companies potentially opting for a federal scheme. I still think that the idea of government being a convener, working with multiple stakeholders, including the child safety groups, which I think have better awareness of what's happening online, to create a common set of tools that are accessible to parents. And then it becomes, if you have sort of a common set of tools, it becomes easier to educate parents on that. So it's not sort of a hodgepodge of things. It becomes very hard to access. And I think about, again, in the FDA context, we were never in, and you remember this, we were never in a good position to spot trends and spot social trends. And that's why we got behind the curve on the initial vaping crisis associated with kids' use of vaping products back in 2018. And it certainly was something that was a challenge with respect to opioids. And with respect to opioids, we ultimately created a small team inside FDA whose job it was to actually monitor social media sites, not for purposes of trying to police the content, but to be able to know what was going on, what people were saying. And this is how early on we spotted use of gabapentin in association with opioids, where people who were abusing opioids were using gabapentin in conjunction with the opioids to help potentiate the high that they were getting. And we first identified that by looking at chat rooms and starting to see people talking about this online. But that was a very unique circumstance where I think that we were, I wouldn't say ahead of a trend, but we were able to see a trend as it was emerging. But more often than not, we were behind these things. You know, with respect to vaping, we found out about that. Certainly the National Youth Tobacco Survey back in 2018 identified the trend, but we started to hear anecdotally from school teachers and people who had kids in high schools of what was happening in the high schools, and that was really the first indication. And I say that just to point out that if the government's in the position of trying to regulate the content, which I'm not even sure is permissible, but if they try to take a more affirmative role, I think it's going to be very hard for government to be in a position to identify these things. And I think that's why putting more controls in the hands of parents and stakeholders in the community who have better awareness of what's going on and allowing them to put in place controls that can then filter that content. And certainly technology is going to be a big solution here. And that's again why I'm worried about regulation, because it would create both a floor and a ceiling, and it may inadvertently stifle the adoption of technology, things like AI filtering that could take out certain imagery from things that kids are seeing. And government can play a role here also in providing that content when they see it to the social media sites, so they can start to put in place those filters, things that are clearly violative. But by and large, I think the government agencies are going to be very far behind the curve in starting to identify this material.
Right. So what does the private sector or some of these companies, can they do proactively to suggest that they're taking this seriously and want to work with government or other stakeholders on solving this problem?
Yeah, look, again, I think they recognize the vulnerability, and so my perception is that they've been leaning forward to try to tout what they're doing. But to the extent that what they're doing remains a very kind of fragmented universe of different things, and different sites are doing different things. TikTok has in place parental pairing, but Instagram doesn't. I think to the extent that these things become more uniform, it's going to be more accessible to the parents, because they're going to know, these are the 10 tools that are available, and they're kind of available uniformly across the different sites. And I think that there are, obviously it's going to vary from site to site, because what you're looking to achieve and the content you're trying to filter is going to be different if you're a parent trying to intervene to take more control of what your children are seeing. But even setting that aside and allowing for that, I still think that there are common tools that could be used across these platforms in variations, and if the platforms were adopting them in a more uniform standard, then it would be easier. It would be more accessible, and it'd be easier for parents to train themselves on them, and even for kids to have awareness of it and do things like self-reporting of things that they were seeing. We don't really have that right now, and I think that's, again, where the government could play a role.
Okay.
That doesn't, my view is it doesn't require regulation. It
Right.
doesn't require legislation. I think that could be done through what we tried to do at FDA, which was bring together the stakeholders, and we did come up with a uniform, wasn't a Bill of Rights, what did you call it? I forget what we called it, but it was basically like a white paper that we generated. This was an open public forum. We generated content that, all the sites agreed that they were going to try to do these certain things. And I think that's going on now, but I don't think that there's really as visible and high level of an effort to do that as there could be.
Is there anyone that you think is being left out of this debate or discussion that should be a part of it and needs to be heard?
Well, I mean, we had this discussion, and I think the one group that I think was absent from our discussion, and maybe they're here today, but should be part of the discussion, is some of the child safety groups. I think that they have a lot of awareness of what's going on. They have more proximity to some of the parental organizations. I think they also have the ability to convene stakeholders at a local level. And so, if you kind of have a common toolbox, ultimately you're going to need to get parents educated on how to make use of these tools. And that could be led at a local level where schools could be leading some of this discussion, trying to incentivize parents and instigate parents to adopt these tools, maybe even requiring it. If you're
Or educate them.
Educate them, but maybe even say at a local school level. You see a lot of schools banning phones in the school, but you could see them just as likely saying, look, if you're going to allow your kid to have a phone in school, you have to do these things to the phone. The other stakeholder, I think that's an important part of this discussion, are the phones themselves, the companies that make the smartphones, because you could, and we had this discussion with one social media site, you could see a realm where the controls are implemented at the level of the phone. So you can go onto an iPhone right now and you can put in place pretty vigorous parental controls on the phone, limit app times, close off certain apps. My children certainly know that you can do this because I've done it. But that information stays on the phone, and to the extent that that information can be voluntarily shared with some of these social media sites, that could create a uniform way to step into age verification, for example. So instead of doing the age verification at the level of every site, you could do it on the phone, and the phone could then promulgate that information to the social media sites to say, hey, this is a 14-year-old's phone.
Right.
I think that the phone providers would be very reluctant to allow that information to seep off the phone without, really sort of voluntary steps on the part of the parents. What happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone. But there's no reason that functionality can't be built in. There's actually apps you can download that would provide for that. And I think that that's another potential solution, I think, so that people who make the smartphones also need to be part of this discussion.
Yeah, very complicated issue, but great to see that people are actually coming together to have this discussion, make progress. Hopefully throughout the day we see more transparency and willing to work together for a standard of care for everybody to kind of align around going forward. So thank you, Semafor, again for hosting us, and thank you, Dr. Gottlieb, for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Please welcome Vera Edelman, staff attorney for the ACLU's Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project, and R Street Institute Digital Director and Fellow Shoshana Weissman. Semafor's Senior Editor Gina Chan joins to guide the conversation.
Hi, good morning to all of you. Thanks to all of you for joining us and those watching online as well. And thank you both to Vera and Shoshana, who have been in the mix on this issue for a long time. So Vera, I wanted to start with you because we were looking at all the states across the country that have passed laws recently around age verification, requiring social media platforms to get some sort of proof of a user's age. And we've seen a host of legal challenges brought around some of these issues. So I wanted to get a sense from you, why is this a problem? Why is the ACLU challenging some of these provisions when kind of theoretically you would think, oh, that seems like a good idea. Why shouldn't, parents or kids be required to prove their age, especially to prevent them from being exposed to certain products, to certain content? What do you see as the problems there?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for having me and for letting me join on screen. It's a funny thing to be in a hybrid meeting, but I appreciate it. I think it's a good and important question. I'm a parent. I certainly care about protecting my kid. I think one thing that is important to keep in mind in all of this is that actually enabling kids to access information, to engage online, to learn, to make up their own minds, to meet other people and join in community is part of protecting them. It's part of protecting them right now. It's part of encouraging them and enabling them to be part of our democratic society in the future. And so I think that's just a big piece of what matters here that sometimes gets missed when we're talking about protecting kids from dangerous ideas or dangerous mediums. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that this isn't our first rodeo. There have been a lot of efforts to do this by the government to protect kids from comic books, from drive-in movies, from video games. And For the most part, courts have held all of those efforts to be unconstitutional, getting to your more legal question. And that's really for two reasons. One is that, especially when we're talking about communication online, what attempts to protect kids or limit what kids can see online does is limit what everyone can see, what everyone can do online. So this is about burdening kids' ability to engage, which, like I said, I think really matters. But it's also about restricting adults' use of information that no one is arguing is illegal for them to access or even necessarily dangerous for them to access. It means robbing people of anonymity, exposing them to security harms, and for some people making it impossible to access ideas at all.
So what's at stake in the Supreme Court case on this issue that you're involved with regarding a law in Texas when it comes to certain age verification requirements?
So that case is called Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton, and it is about age verification on adult sites. And the question is essentially, can the government burden adults' access to fully protected speech in its efforts to protect kids from dangerous ideas, which I think is squarely part of what we're talking about today. And the court has answered that question before in at least two cases specifically about the internet, Reno versus Ashcroft and Ashcroft versus Free Speech Coalition, and it has said no. So we are very hopeful that it will say the same thing again. The Fifth Circuit opinion that we are appealing from is quite an outlier in this space.
Got it. And Shoshana, I wanted to turn it to you in terms of how you see this issue, because you're coming at it from more of sort of a social, cultural perspective for youth, looking at protections from them, but almost on the other side where perhaps some of these sort of blunt tools to regulate these platforms could have unintended consequences. Where do you stand on that?
For sure. So the First Amendment issues are really problematic, and I'm glad that we had Vera to talk about them. But there's also major cybersecurity issues. One thing I've been looking into a lot is child identity theft, which is a really big problem because kids don't check to make sure that they're not victims of fraud. No one's thinking that a kid's gonna have that kind of issue, but it's a really, really big problem. And with age verification, especially when you have to confirm consent from the parent for anything, to make sure the parent's the parent and the child's the child, there's no way to do that without identity verification. And that means social security numbers, government IDs. And one of the big systems used to do that, that I think is pronounced Authentics, it has numbers in the name, it was breached for over a year and a half before I started working on this, and it was wide open for anyone with credentials to go in and pick out government IDs, social security numbers, tied to the account. Of children and adults too, both. And it creates this massive cybersecurity risk that even if you're not concerned about adults, I mean, this is a huge issue for kids to be able to get this information, tie it together, use it for fraud, and there's ways the government can combat that too. But I'm really concerned about if we're trying to protect kids online, let's start with not making it worse. And let's also, like Vera was saying, let's protect their ability to access information. For myself, I started networking with elected officials when I was 14 on social media, because I was like that at 14, and I used it to find medical answers. And there's so many positive uses for kids that it has to be up to the parent. And I'm all for parental controls, but when the government mandates it, that's when you force identity verification. But if parents do it of their own volition, then they can just say, hey, come over here and make sure their accounts are connected.
So where do you see the balancing act? Because obviously, I think, most people in this room can agree, we all want to protect kids, we all want to protect young people from certain content, from being exposed to marketing around certain products. So where do you see the ability to do that and to regulate that while also maintaining access for them for the things that do help them in ways that you described?
I mean, I think something I love is that Dr. Gottlieb was talking about having the working group of platforms, and it has to be big and small, because some of the worst stuff happens on the smallest platforms, but some great stuff happens on smaller ones, like even All Trails, where kids can learn to hike, or GitHub, where kids can learn to code with adults and stuff. So I think that we need to have all the platforms, all the kinds of platforms in the room and talk together about best practices. I'm not saying there can't be regulation, just every proposal I've seen has these massive holes that make things worse, especially from a privacy and security angle. But one thing the government can do to protect kids online and in general is just one super simple stuff. One, the Social Security Administration could check Social Security numbers before issuing them so they don't issue a lifetime of fraud and criminal history to kids. Make sure foster care youth are more protected in a similar vein. And the IRS should tell parents when their child's identity is being used for fraud, and the IRS refuses to tell parents even though they're required by law. It's not.
And you were saying before that's because kids aren't taxpayers.
Right.
So they're not sending the government money.
Right. That's the argument they gave. And I know it's not exactly children online, but I think if we got there and if we got to a better state of cybersecurity, then we could talk a little bit more about if we wanted to do deeper age verification. But I mean, this is, before we even get there, we have to make sure that we're not setting up kids to be just massive victims, even in lighter cases. Yeah.
And Vera, I wanted to talk to you about what's been happening here in Washington recently, outside of the states, where we saw the Senate pass major legislation for the first time in years regarding child online safety. They've sort of revamped the Children Online Privacy Act to sort of expand the ages that are covered, going up from 13 years old. Where do you see those rules? Obviously, we're not quite sure if they'll actually pass Congress, given they're preoccupied with some other things. But do you see those rules as also being problematic on top of some of the things that the states have done?
So I think there are certainly things that are happening at the federal level that are problematic. I think that any law that is aimed at restricting access to harmful or dangerous ideas that is content-based will be subject to strict scrutiny, to use some legal terms, and I think will almost certainly fail. I think there are real problems, like I said, with the government saying these particular ideas are just too dangerous for people to engage with. These particular ideas are likely to cause anxiety, or we're worried about exposing kids to feelings of depression. I feel anxious reading the news, and I think it's still important for me to read the news. And I think at the same time, efforts, I can't say that there's a specific effort that I think is quite on the right path, but I do think that in the world of regulation, consumer privacy regulation is another important and viable path to go down. I think that there's actually a lot of overlap. I think that passing good, strong consumer privacy regulation that, for example, uses data minimization, that requires the highest privacy settings by default, that gives users the default of not having a lot of information collected and then used to target ads, to target information towards them, but that also gives them the option to opt in if they want to. I think those are all good and important paths forward. I'm not sure that that's exactly where the focus is right now.
Yeah, so you think a little bit more sort of limited, giving more options and not being so broad in sort of their prescriptions of how these things should be implemented.
And not focusing so much on the content that is being communicated through the platforms, but rather the ways that the platforms are engaging with their users, the types of information that the platforms are slurping up from people that people might not know about, might not want to be sharing, kind of placing guardrails there. And I think for the lawyers following along, I think Net Choice versus Bonta, which is a recent opinion from the Ninth Circuit, is an interesting teasing apart of exactly these issues. It looks at restrictions aimed at platforms providing access to quote unquote harmful information. It says those are content-based, that's a real problem. And then it separates out the regulations that I would say seem more squarely focused at actually protecting users' privacy, and says you need to analyze those differently, court below, they might actually be okay.
Got it. And Shoshana, what about you in terms of the recent actions from Washington? Is that sort of a path forward to getting to a better place? Do you feel like it's too sort of broad and the burdens it sort of puts on platforms is, as Vera was saying, sort of if something causes anxiety or depression, well, you can get that from watching the news these days, unfortunately. Where do we draw the lines?
For sure. So it's interesting, the sponsors of COSA refused to admit that it was an age verification bill and said, no, this is not an age verification bill. Then the CRS report came out and said, this age verification bill. I'm like, all right, let's be honest about what we're talking about. But anxiety and depression can be caused by all different things. I mean, a lot of people have climate anxiety, news in general, but all kinds of stuff. Medical news can give people anxiety, and I think it just gives a door for censorship and First Amendment issues. I love the privacy angle, and I think a really important principle here is not to divide child privacy from adult privacy, because then you need to figure out who's a child, who's an adult. Skip all that and privacy for everyone, not just because it's good for everyone, but because the task of dividing out children and adults lead us back to the problems of age assurance and age verification. So when you come at privacy that way, I think it helps a lot. And not that there has to be some nuance within there, but I think that should be a really big guiding principle. And that COSA, that other similar bills that keep trying to segment out children recreate the same problems.
So really it should be protections for all.
Right.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for those viewpoints.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please welcome Craig Purser, President and CEO of the National Beer Wholesalers Association. Semafor contributor and PBS NewsHour co-anchor Amna Nawaz will lead this interview.
Good morning, everyone. So nice to be here with you. Craig, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Amna. It's great to see all this wonderful crowd on a Wednesday after the end of summer.
There you go. And just as in the way of background, Craig Purser is, of course, the president and CEO of the National Beer Wholesalers Association. I told him backstage, my husband, as an enthusiastic consumer of his product, sends his gratitude and thanks. I said thank you for drinking beer. There you go. But this is a man who knows a lot about navigating both state and federal regulations. So we're going to talk today about why all that matters, how you're thinking about this issue, social media and age and access, and what it could mean for the future too.
Sure.
So let's just start with where we are right now, which is to say the U.S. alcohol markets, all of them, right, beer and wine and spirits on all fronts are among the most regulated.
Absolutely.
It's fair to say, at the federal, state, and sometimes even the local level, right?
Absolutely right.
What does that mean in terms of your business operating in this regulatory environment for manufacturers and consumers?
Well, it's interesting because it means a lot of things, obviously, to the business and to the industry, but it also means a lot of things to consumers. Because part of what we have in this marketplace for alcohol, and it is regulated. I mean, in a lot of ways, a lot of people don't like all of their state or their local alcohol laws. People complain about this or that or the other thing. But this system has provided unparalleled choice and value. When you think about the number of selections of beers, for instance, it's really just an amazing marketplace. I'll give you a number. In 1983, there were fewer than 50 breweries in the United States. Fewer than 50. And today there's over 10,000. That is an American success story. And it's not necessarily in spite of the regulation. In some cases, the regulation has aided that business development.
Well, tell us more about that, because this is the argument we often hear from regulated industries, right? Which is that more regulation will stifle innovation, it will hurt competition. That seems not at all to be the case.
Well, I want to differentiate because more regulation isn't the answer necessarily. Better regulation is the answer. More effective regulation, that which works best. And it's interesting, you almost can't have a conversation about alcohol regulation without looking to the fact that this is a product that's really unique in America. It is the subject of not one but two constitutional amendments, and they were kind of put into place to deal with, it's hard to believe, 92 years ago, we repealed what had been a 13-year ban on the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors. And that, of course, was the 18th Amendment. Interestingly, in all of their the same short-sightedness, perhaps, that maybe led to prohibition when Congress and the state legislatures repealed the 18th Amendment with the 21st Amendment. In Section 1, they repealed it, and in Section 2, they gave great authority to the states to regulate alcohol in a manner that worked best. So it's something that the industry has dealt with for going on 100 years. It ebbs and it flows and it evolves, and every year it seems like in legislatures across the country, we have robust discussions about what that regulation looks like, but it has resulted in a very effective marketplace. And it's a marketplace that really balances the whole idea of control and revenue collection with competition and availability. And it's not perfect, but it really, I think, is a successful story.
Although I will say, as we joked backstage, prohibition would have been a lot different with social media, I think, if you had TikTok and Instagram back then.
Well, you would have known where to go, and so would the police. So, I mean...
But so better regulation, as you say, and as you're making clear here as well, stressing that states' rules and state regulations should take primacy. A lot of people would say that creates a patchwork of regulations we then have to navigate. You seem to prefer it, though. Why?
Well, it's one of those things because it's because it works, because it gives rise to these successes. And it frustrates some in the industry without question. I mean, the whole idea of why can't I get my beer or my wine or my spirit, anytime, any place, anywhere.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is, when it comes to beverage alcohol, it's a unique product. It can be a great source of enjoyment, and it can tear families apart. And you have to understand that balance. One of the other panels was talking about that whole balancing act. I'm not sure it's an act. It's an objective of trying to balance those competing interests.
So a lot of what we're focusing on here is about social media access, online access, age, all of these issues around that. When you talk about the manufacturer's perspective here and how you reach consumers, right, for an industry that is heavily regulated in who can consume, how and where, all of that, tell me about your marketing, your advertising strategy, how that has changed, how you navigate these issues.
Well, the trade association that represents brewers in our industry, I'll pick on our partner organization, the Beer Institute. They have had in place for nearly 30 years an advertising and marketing code that's actually been pretty effective at helping give guidance and hold to account. And that's a really important word when we're talking about regulation, accountability. But what the Beer Institute's advertising and marketing code has been able to do, and we've watched advertising and marketing evolve, obviously with digital media. But in its origination, it was talking about print, outdoor, and broadcast advertising, and it had a whole set of strict standards about what should and should not be acceptable. Issues even before digital, like looking at marketing demographics and who you're marketing to. As we've watched digital communication become so commonplace, maybe to a certain extent that code needed to catch up. And I'm pleased to see that they've done that, and they've been able to, every year they have an independent review board that hears complaints about marketing. I will say that the distilled spirits industry has a similar code, and I think those have been helpful in holding industry members into account. But that accountability is really aided in alcohol by the requirement of a license. And when you have licensed manufacturers selling to licensed distributors and selling to licensed retailers, there's a check there. There's kind of a belt and a suspenders system that I think has served the industry, but more importantly, served the public well.
But when you say the code has evolved, it seems like there's a set of guidelines
Sure.
sort of that people in the industry have to adhere to. Can you give us an example of what's one change that folks have made in that code for the digital era specifically?
Well, it has been, looking at what the tech industry is doing as it relates to age gating.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is something that is not the exclusive remedy to all of these issues. I think we as an industry would not say that's all that's needed. That's why it's so important to understand these licenses and the fact that if a retail establishment or a delivery operator sells to somebody underage, there are consequences. They lose that license. They risk forfeiture of that privilege to engage in that commerce. But when it comes to digital, it's been having to update, and apply some of those technology I think
age
that's why I was
verification.
glad to do this, because we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, give me an example of that. How have you learned? I mean, one of the things about age verification we've been talking about across industries is how kids will find a way to get around it.
Sure.
And there's no perfect way, there seems to be, even with states rolling out age verification rules on social media, there doesn't seem to be consensus about how to do it. So how confident are you in your industry's age verification standards?
Well, I'll give you an example, because, and this is really interesting. I think maybe it was the fact that Dr. Gottlieb was here and some of us got to know him during COVID as an expert. But I think when we look at the advent, for instance, of home delivery, that is certainly a convenience item. We watched in a period of about 6 months in 2020, all of that accelerated by a period of 5 or maybe even 10 years as it relates to the ability of us to get goods and services delivered to our house. And I don't know about y'all's neighborhood, but sometimes you can't find a parking space because there's too many Amazon trucks. I mean, that's the way of the world now. But getting that right was especially important. I was on a Zoom call in 2020, and my wife had called in an Instacart delivery to our house, and I was on with some industry people and a member of Congress. It was an unusual call, and this person from Instacart that was making the delivery, there happened to be 2 bottles of wine and 2 12-packs of beer in with that grocery delivery. And at the time, I'm a mid-50s guy, pretty obviously over 21, and I'm literally on the Zoom call with the member of Congress trying to check in this Instacart delivery, and I can't find my doggone driver's license. And I'm super sorry. I'm kind of embarrassed. I probably wasn't wearing pants. It was COVID, and I answered the door, and for a split second, and this person was not going to leave me this delivery without a copy of an identification. Fortunately, I ran upstairs, found my passport in my sock drawer, and I was able to show that. She took a picture, and we were done. But that's the kind of thing that we've all had to deal with as it relates to there's marketing and then there's sales, and this was a sales example.
It seems like in any industry where age restrictions really matter, right, for safety and protection of minors in particular, there's like a nightmare scenario on social media of your product going viral in some kind of TikTok challenge or something, right? How have you seen that? And also, how do you view that? Is that your responsibility as the manufacturers to get that stuff taken care of and monitor it, or is that on the social media companies?
Well, and I think that people are going to behave irresponsibly, and that's a consumer behavior that you're describing typically. I think it's making certain that the industry is not playing any kind of a role in that at manufacturer, at distribution, or at retail. Many of those things, we're watching all kinds of things on digital media. I've got 3 college-age or graduated kids, and I've seen it all as it relates to all that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
But I think that's where and I'm not an expert on technology or media, and I'm not here to tell folks what to do around that. But some of this goes to responsibility. Some of this goes to engaging in responsible behavior. Some of this comes to parents. Some of this comes to other kids, saying, hey, is this really a good idea? And, it's always a balance. And the balance is, if you engage in that digital communication is going to live forever. And that may, have an implication for you, typically young people, not always young people. But we've got to do a better job, I think, of ensuring that those folks understand. Once again, there's that word again, accountability. May affect you when you're 24 or 25 years old looking for that first job.
In the way of that accountability, do you, as an industry, work with social media companies then to address some of that content?
Yes, and especially when it comes to ensuring that these and I'm going to focus on grocery home delivery because the whole notion of that retail sale is so important. Mm-hmm. That is something that we can affect. That's something that through technology and through the advent of greater education, we can change behavior. Mm-hmm. Illegal underage purchase and consumption, it's still against the law. And so it is, and it's been interesting to see innovation, just like, There are folks that are innovating to go around the law. There has been a lot of innovation for law enforcement. Many of the law enforcement agencies have access to identification guides that are digital to verify a fake ID. And whether that behavior is digital or whether that's analog, we're watching folks work together to address that. Obviously, when you're talking about delivery, all kinds of questions get asked at the state level. Who is making that delivery? Does that delivery person, that third party, need to be licensed? And yeah, we've seen different states deal with it in different ways. But we are typically involved in those decisions and working together to get the best outcome.
Seems like the consensus here is folks working together from all different sides of this. I have like a dozen more questions. I hope we can convene again. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Craig Purser for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Joining us virtually now is Paul Rockwell, Vice President of Trust and Safety at Pinterest. Semafor's Gina Chan returns to guide the conversation.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, good morning.
You look like you're in a very Pinterest orchestrated place. I wanted to start off by just talking about where Pinterest stands amongst all these issues we've been discussing today, because people don't necessarily think of Pinterest when we're talking about issues of kids online, safety issues, and that sort of thing. But your CEO, Bill Reddy, has talked pretty vocally about the experiences that Pinterest has gone through on this issue, where when the platform started its short form video and sort of AI feed optimization efforts, you saw that some people were actually sort of misusing it and targeting kids in certain ways. And so I wanted to just ask how you guys have learned from that in terms of what Pinterest needs to do to protect kids, young people, particularly girls, on the platform, and where you see technology helping or hurting in those efforts.
Absolutely. And Pinterest is a platform that's oriented around positivity and inspiration. And we're building a business around that very mission. Whether that's decorating a room or it's picking out an outfit for prom, we want to make sure that folks can take those ideas, those inspirations, those pins, and convert them into real-world action. And teenagers, in particular, are at a fairly vulnerable stage in their life journey. Right? They're growing, they're learning, they're developing. And for us, we've got to put guardrails in place to protect their emotional well-being, their mental health. And we do this in a number of ways. And as the VP of Trust and Safety, my role is to make sure that not only is this a positive and inspiring platform, but it's also safe and that it's age appropriate and those experiences are reflective of those commitments. We do this in a number of different ways. Our community guidelines can serve as a starting place for what is and is not acceptable on the platform. The rules of the road, if you will, and making sure that folks clearly understand what is and is not okay. And we have humans that are reviewing content that's flagged. We're labeling content. We're building AI models to detect violative content, bad actors. And kind of coming back to your question of how do we kind of pull this all together, we make sure that we've got the right systems in place to identify violative behavior and violative content and quickly action it. We also are making sure that we've got controls in place so that for teenagers in particular, and I'll give you an example, the 13 to 15-year-olds, we have those profiles are private only. Not as an option, it's private only. So they're not getting contacted by some random person on the internet and some random person's not commenting on their pins or their boards, it gives them the space to grow, to learn, to explore in a safe environment. And as they get older, we kind of graduate them up to less controls. But we also give parents the ability to have parents and caregivers the opportunity to sit down and have conversations with the kids in their home about the controls that are in place and make sure that they've struck the right balance. So there's a number of different ways, but trust and safety work is never done.
So you talked about AI, so how does AI also pose a threat in those ways as well? Because it can obviously be used to, heard of deep fakes and various ways that you could, possibly obscure or lie about your age, your identity, on both sides for, both the users and possibly bad actors who are, trying to target them. So how are you also defending the platform against some of those threats posed by AI?
Yeah, and as I'm sure it's not a surprise, bad guys are going to continue to do bad things, right? And they're going to use the latest in technology to accomplish those things and get around controls. We've been using AI, and we're going to continue to use AI in order to identify patterns of bad activity and clamp down on it very quickly. But we're also using it on a trust and safety side for positive things, making sure that we've got space for folks to see positive content and take down violative content quickly. And to kind of bring that home, things like self-harm, suicide, eating disorders, because of the advancements we're making with AI, our ability to detect that content and pull it down means that very few people are seeing it. And at the end of 2023, we were seeing that for those categories of violative content, 95% of those were pulled down before people could see them, and the remaining were 10 individuals had seen those content. So we're getting better at leveraging the technology to create a safer space, but as a business, we're also using it for positivity and inclusivity. And to kind of share some of that, we've got our inclusive search. So you've got body shape and hair pattern are two of the dimensions by which we allow folks to search so that they can start to see themselves in the content that's on our platform. And Gen Z, which makes up 40% of our active user base, is really loving these features. It gives them an opportunity to really search for things that resonate with them. And with hair pattern, we've seen a 200% increase in engagement as a result with Gen Z. So it's an opportunity for us to really bring AI and show what's possible and how we can really use it for positivity and inspiration.
So we've been talking as well about all these states that have passed, various age verification rules. We've seen the Senate just recently expand the Children Online Privacy Act to include teenagers in that as well. How does Pinterest deal with sort of all these different rules from the state level, and obviously we'll see what happens on the federal level, but also sort of internationally, especially when it comes to user-generated content, because some of the complaints we're hearing from some of the companies that have age-restricted products or other things where they're trying actually not to reach young people, that a lot of what gets seen involving their products on social media are sort of out of their hands. And how much do these state rules help on that front? And does the patchwork system sort of, make life more difficult for people like you?
Yeah. So I think we can all agree that federal regulation to protect kids online is long overdue. And we've been spending a lot of time with policymakers to try and assist in accomplishing the goal of how do we make the internet a more educational, informative, additive technology in the lives of young people as opposed to addictive. Because I think that's part of the challenge here is platforms have a tendency to be addictive. And Pinterest is not a platform where content goes viral. We surface additive, constructive, meaningful content. And so regulation needs to follow suit. Like, what do we want to solve for? Not how can we use regulation as a blunt instrument, kind of chasing a latest product or a latest situation at a platform. But the patchwork that you called out is absolutely untenable. I mean, I run an organization that's largely focused on how do we maintain compliance, and we're allocating a significant number of resources chasing compliance as opposed to allocating those resources to build additional safety controls and make the platform safer. And so it's challenging going state by state and then looking at the federal level and then multiple countries. It's absolutely something that we want to continue to lean into the conversations with policymakers to help solve and streamline, but a family should have a similar expectation of care and have a consistent experience regardless of what state they're in. This shouldn't be, I go from one state to another and now I have different controls, different experiences, different expectations. So I think a federal regulation here would really be helpful for everyone.
So given the state of things now, are you basically building the platform to whichever region or state or country has the toughest regulations, because you at least know that then it covers all your bases? Or are you literally, making tweaks to depending on, where you're accessing the site to basically comply with the local rules?
Yeah, so it is a little dependent. I think we are making sure that we are abiding by the laws and regulations that apply to us. It is challenging, though, in order to make that a reality across the globe. Because again, there are a number of differing standards that are out there, and making sure that we're providing a consistent, positive experience for people that are using the platform is challenging when there are so many different standards to adhere to.
Yeah. So what would you tell policymakers about what platforms like Pinterest can do and what you can't do, or what is difficult to do? Because I think there's a sense, and you hear a lot of times during hearings in Congress when CEOs of Meta and various other social platforms are called before them that, why can't you just do this? Why can't you just block out all of that? And, you're obviously dealing with a lot of pins, a lot of content. What do they not understand about sort of the art of the possible?
Yeah, I mean, there are 500 billion pins, and 1.5 billion are being pinned a week. Like, we have 522 million monthly active users, and continues to grow. So the scale at which we're solving some of these challenges is daunting. And I don't know that it's as simple as just doing X. We absolutely are leaning into the moment, and Pinterest takes trust and safety very seriously. We continue to invest in this and make sure that this is a safe corner of the internet because we believe it's possible. We believe that a positive and inspiring social platform is possible, and that businesses can thrive by doing this. So we see this as a great opportunity to lean in with policymakers and kind of pull in policymakers, tech companies, civil society groups to sit down and take this from conversation to action. Because there's been a lot of conversation on these things over the years, but I think we've got a unique opportunity ahead of us right now to solve some very meaningful challenges in this space, and we're all in.
Yeah. Well, we'll hope we all get there. Thank you so much, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely.
Joining us virtually is New York Governor Kathy Hochul. Semafor contributor Amna Nawaz returns to lead this interview.
Governor Hochul, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate the invitation. It's an important topic to be conversing about, and I appreciate everyone who's gathered here today to listen to it.
So for the benefit of everyone in the room, one of the reasons we're so pleased that Governor Hochul could join us today is because it was just in June that she signed into law two major pieces of legislation, one expanding on federal privacy protections for kids, the other regulating social media algorithms for users under the age of 18. And many people say that both of these laws could be blueprints for other states to follow. So Governor, let's start with that one law called the Safe for Kids Act. It made New York the very first state to pass a law that regulates social media algorithms, basically requires those companies to display the content chronologically, right, as a default for kids under the age of 18. Why was that a priority for you, and how do you enforce it?
This was the outgrowth of a year-long journey that I started back when I announced $1 billion to address the mental health crisis in our state. And I went on a listening tour of particularly teenagers, but all ages, but really focused on young people to listen to them about what their challenges were and why we've had to have the Surgeon General declare that there's so many hours a day young people spent on social media and their cell phones that it's becoming a public health crisis. And what I saw firsthand and listened to firsthand were stories of teenagers who were in great distress. The pressures on teenagers are great for any age. All of us remember what it's like to be a high school student. It was not an easy time, but with the influence of social media on them, and I'm not talking about their ability to go to a website and check out, this does not restrict their ability. It simply says, after listening to all the challenges that our young people are going through, that they're being bombarded all day long by social media algorithms that are designed to pull them in with their addictive content and hold them. And it's not always positive information is the problem. I've listened to them, and they want us to save them from themselves. Young people can't stop this, but the adults in the room have to. We have no choice but to try and save them from this and to allow them to live healthier, more normal lives as previous generations were able to. So what this does is it says parents are in charge. Mm-hmm. Parents who want to allow this are certainly welcome to, but we're saying that these young people are free to go where they want to go, but the companies themselves cannot be capturing personal information about them and then using that to devise addictive algorithms that hold them literally most of their waking hours of the day. That was why this was important. We work with the industry. Mm-hmm. I've said to the industry, as we're always being threatened with lawsuits, it happens all the time in my job, I said, listen, get out of the courtroom and get into my conference room. We can solve this. We want responsible social media. And I'm asking those actors to really lead the rest of the nation with the model that we've devised and overcame a lot of opposition, but I feel even more committed to it as we continued our summer of listening sessions. And that's what one state did, and I believe that others should follow.
Well, let me ask you about those interactions with the social media companies in particular, because while you're the first state to take this kind of action, you've seen a number of other states have taken some kind of action trying to address these same problems that you raised. Basically, all of them have ended up in court and facing legal challenges. So do you expect to face the same, and do you think this will hold up?
We don't have to go there is my message. New York State, particularly New York City, we're very tech friendly. We are the #1 destination for tech jobs in America today. We're enormously proud of this. We want them to grow and be successful, and even in this space, but not when it comes to our kids. We're just asking them, can you carve out children under the age of 18 and not have these addictive algorithms bombard them? When you're adults, they'll be able to have more decision-making authority. They can do what they want. But I think that they should, avoid any litigation with us because we feel we'll be successful. We spent a lot of time researching this and welcoming their comments, and this is, we believe, the path that we should be on.
Well, we have seen, especially in the last year, so many states trying to tackle this in lots of different ways. Do you think, in the absence of any kind of federal regulation, that a state-by-state approach is the best way to tackle this?
No, there should be a federal approach. I support businesses. I don't think that we should have so many roadblocks. I want them to be successful. I want them to hire more people in our state. This is an important part of our economy and our identity. But that being said, in the absence of federal legislation, and sometimes waiting for a Republican House and a Democratic Senate and a president to get together and be able to solve this is perhaps asking too much. I don't know. It should happen. I served in Congress, and I believe there should be a path forward. But in the meantime, every day that goes by where the children of my state are not being protected, I feel I have to do something. I happen to be the first mom governor of New York. This gives me a different perspective that we've not had in our leaders before. And I do not ignore the voices of young people. I listen to them, and I want to help them. When they're asking me for help as an adult, I know who I'm fighting for.
So when you say you want to see federal regulation, could you be specific? Do you want to see federal action similar to this law that you signed that goes after the algorithm specifically?
Right. Again, this is not stopping social media platforms from doing what they do. We're simply saying isolate young people 18 and under, leave them alone, let them scroll and go where they want to go, but do not be affirmatively devising algorithms intentionally addictive based on their preferences that you've captured from places they've gone before and using that to hold them captive throughout the day. That's all we're talking about. I think that's a very reasonable approach. And if the federal government does it, then all the companies will know the rules of the road in every state. I know it's difficult for them to have to say, well, we have this policy here, this policy here, but they should be supporting an all-state approach if we can't get Congress to act as well. It's in their interest.
Yeah, I'm curious because we mentioned that some folks have said what you've done could be a blueprint for other places. Have other governors been reaching out to you, asking you questions about how it's going, how they can get this done?
We have a lot of conversations about this, but also even how young people are being accessed throughout the day. It's basically because they have their cell phone attached to their hand, right? And we're talking about that here in the state of New York is during the school day, when young people should be listening to the adults in the room, listening to the teachers, not engaging in all this conflict-ridden conversations that happen online because it's, the bullying is intense. This has taken our young people to a very depressed place in many cases. I've heard from them firsthand. So we are actually looking at a way to address this statewide and talking about why do we even allow cell phones in a school? We don't allow video games. Young people are restricted from smoking and from alcohol and a lot of other influences that they're certainly welcome to enjoy when they're older. But this is the negative effects of this on the psychology and the mental health of our young people cannot be disputed. As I said, our Surgeon General has pointed this out, and we as the adults in the room, the adults in government, have to step up. So I believe that this should be a broad-based approach. I'm reaching out my hands once again to the companies and saying, work with us to solve this.
So on the issue of cell phone regulation in schools in particular, which I know is another priority of yours, we have seen other state legislatures, it's worth pointing out, Republican-led legislatures in Virginia and in Utah, banning smartphones in schools. When you say that you're looking at some kind of step, do you think a ban in New York is necessary?
I personally do. I am looking to talk to other stakeholders. We have a big conference in a couple of weeks with our teachers' unions who are very involved with this, who support this. And I know that there's parents who are anxious about this, but I do want to point out one thing. My children were in middle school when the slaughter of teenagers at Columbine High School occurred. And it shook every parent I knew to their core to think that your child could be exposed to this or go to school one day and you think you're going to return home and they don't. This is the worst nightmare for parents. But I assume that parents would need to have connection with their children throughout the day through a cell phone. But what I learned from law enforcement when we brought them in, their view is very straightforward and direct, and this is it. If there is a crisis on the college campus or on a campus with high school or grade school, if there's a mass shooter, the last thing you want to have happen is people reach for a cell phone and start texting their parents or their friends or capturing on video even. They need to be following the adult in the room, their professor, their teachers, their whoever's the lunchroom monitor. They need to turn their attention to the person who will get them to safety. And I think when that's absorbed by parents, and parents remember that they didn't have access to their parents throughout the day, this is also about young people's personal development. Yes, parents are happy they can bring in the lunch if they get a text message that their son or daughter forgot their lunch. However, you're not teaching them coping skills. if they have to figure it out on their own, if they have to eat their friends, borrow half a sandwich from their friend, I can guarantee the next day they won't forget it. So let's not forget that our responsibility is not to raise children, it's to raise adults, fully functioning adults, those who can interact with each other, those who know how to make eye contact, unlike what's happening in our schools today. Our schools are silent, absolutely silent, in the lunchroom and in phys ed class and in the schoolyard, because no one's communicating at a human level. We've lost that, and we have to recapture that.
Well,
I want
Governor,
young people to emerge
if I may,
with skills
pardon
that'll
the
help them be
interruption.
productive adults.
Pardon the interruption.
Yes,
I know our time is limited. I want to be respectful of your schedule, but you mentioned, of course, I take your point on law enforcement's perspective on this. You have been on a statewide listening tour. You're talking to people in your community. How do they feel? How do parents feel about a potential cell phone ban in schools? What do they tell you?
When parents have had a chance to listen to our perspective, what teachers are saying, the fact that 72% of teachers surveyed in this country said that it has become a major impediment to teaching their children, parents are paying attention to that. And once we can deal with that law enforcement side of it, we are winning them over. I'm hearing from more school boards as well and school districts. We actually have some examples in New York where they went cold turkey. 1 or 2 years ago, we've had people come in from those schools, and they talk about initially there was resistance from the community, resistance from parents, and almost to a person, they're saying, what took us so long? We're getting our kids back. They're acting like normal, carefree kids who are not just so stressed out every day about someone who's going to be sending a message or someone who's mocking them out on social media. Even the drama teachers and the chorus teachers are saying that right now, kids don't want to try out for auditions. They don't want to go to these, they don't want to sing in public. They don't want to perform in a school play because they're going to be captured on video and it's going to go viral in the school and everybody's going to mock them out. This has had an effect that I don't think people could have foreseen, but the bottom line is this: they're supposed to be paying attention and learning in school. They have plenty of hours once they leave that school to engage with anybody they want to talk to on their free time with their parents' involvement. And I'm just talking about let them start to learn again and act like children.
Governor, I wouldn't be doing my job as a journalist if I didn't ask you about recent news about your office, and that was the story that broke yesterday about your former Deputy Chief of Staff, Linda Sun, who was arrested and charged with acting as an undisclosed agent of the Chinese government. Your office has made clear she'd been fired in March of 2023 for misconduct, and you are cooperating with law enforcement. But is there anything else you can tell us about that case?
Absolutely shocking. And she has been in government for many, many years, even prior to the time I became governor, where she was involved in making a lot of decisions related to the relationship between the administration at the time and the Chinese government, promoting Chinese viewpoints and giving them proclamations and visas, and actually at the same time really diminishing any involvement with the country of Taiwan. It is shocking in its scale. I'm glad we were able to see some evidence that was, didn't look right to us, and we immediately alerted the authorities, and hence we have this outcome. And I would just say this: to think that that any foreign agent, any foreign government has the audacity to infiltrate a government organization like the state of New York has to be addressed with. And we'll be talking more about what we want to see happen later in today. But I will say this: everyone should be aware who they are empowering with positions. Again, she was doing more proclamations and outreach to the community. She had no access to documentation or security information at all, or cyber security. So there was a limit to it. On the other hand, it never should have happened. And we're taking strong actions at this time, again, cooperating with the Eastern District of New York fully to make sure that they have everything they need from us.
Finally, it wouldn't be a Washington, D.C. panel if I didn't ask you about politics. So I have to ask, related to the upcoming elections, because it wasn't too long ago that House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi has lamented time and again the loss of 5 New York congressional seats in 2022. She mentioned it multiple times in a recent interview with me as well. And recently when she was asked why she thinks that happened, she said, quote, "I think it related to the gubernatorial race." Do you think that it did?
No. The same year we lost 5 seats in California. So I think there's a broader analysis that would be justified.
And when you look ahead, do you think that Democrats can flip those seats back in November?
I sure do. That's what I'm devoting an enormous amount of my energy. The last time I had been governor just for a very short time, just ascended into the role unexpectedly. And now that I'm through that, I'm laser focused on building up the state party. And we have 5 seats I believe we can pick up. We already picked up Tom Suozzi's seat, and I was very involved in that. He left his seat in Congress to run against me, and that was one of those seats we lost. But all's well that ends well. I have accepted his apology for that, and I thought it was important that we send him back to Congress again to increase our numbers. I served in Congress in the minority. Barack Obama was in his first years. We had Speaker Boehner in charge. I saw how challenging it is for a Democratic president to accomplish anything with a Republican minority. I see what President Biden's going through. I want to change that dynamic for President Harris and make sure she has strong allies to do what they have to do to protect working members of our society and give people a good chance at living the American dream and all the other agenda items that are so important, building back our economy, making it stronger than even it is today. So there's a lot we can do, and so that's why I'm devoting an enormous amount of my attention to helping in those battleground seats, even as we speak.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul, thank you so much for joining us on behalf of me and everyone in the room. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Please welcome this morning's final speaker, FTC Director of Consumer Protection, Sam Levine. Gina Chan returns to moderate.
Thank you, Sam. As the regulator in the House, you get to have the last word.
Wonderful.
So I wanted to talk about the Federal Trade Commission's role and how the agency has been approaching social media, especially with the current administration. The agency has been pretty aggressive, I would say, on that front. We've seen recently, I think in December, the $275 million penalty for Epic Games, the maker of Fortnite, because of some violations the agency found there in regards to the Children Privacy Act. Your agency's referral to the Justice Department on TikTok regarding violations on those fronts also resulted in the Justice Department's recent lawsuit against that platform. So explain the FTC's approach to this, especially when it comes to protecting kids online, teenagers, and sort of the remit the agency has, because obviously its powers are limited, but it seems like you're using what you do have pretty prolifically.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We don't have a data protection authority in the United States, so much of that work falls to the FTC. And if you look at what we've done over the last 3 years under Chair Lina Khan, is we've really taken a new approach, I think, to online regulation. We are rejecting this model known as notice and consent, notice and choice, where we're counting on consumers and parents to essentially protect themselves by reading long privacy policies and checking I agree.
Which none of us read, actually.
None of us read. None of us would have time to read, even if we wanted to, and companies are changing them at will, so it's not even rational. So we're really pursuing a different approach where we're trying to get actual safeguards around online safety and online privacy for people. And we've been especially aggressive and I think especially effective when it comes to kids and teens. So I'll just mention 2 recent examples, one of which you mentioned. In December of last year, we filed the largest children's privacy action in our history against Epic Games. It was a $275 million penalty plus a $200+ million judgment for unauthorized charges. And what we allege is that Epic Games let countless kids under 13 on their platform without getting their parents' consent. And we also allege, and I think this is really groundbreaking and important, that the company's default privacy settings put both kids and teens at risk. We know that COPPA, the Children's Privacy Law, protects people only up to 13. But we know that a kid doesn't turn 13 and become immune to all the harms that they can face online. So we've been really focused on taking a holistic view of the harms young people can face. And what we saw in the Epic Games matter, of course they operate the Fortnite game, is that the company allowed by default kids and teens to chat with strangers. Well, what happened as a result? There was sexual predation, there was harassment, all sorts of really worrisome practices, and we allege that those practices and those default settings were unlawful. We allege they were unfair under the FTC Act, which is the first time we've used that authority to make such an allegation. The order we got against Epic, in addition to the monetary judgment, actually forced Epic to change its default settings to make it more privacy protective for kids and teens. I think in a similar vein, just over the summer, a couple of weeks ago, we brought a case against an anonymous messaging app called NGL. They were targeting high schoolers. We alleged that they were allowing rampant cyberbullying, encouraging kids to send each other messages like, "Are you straight?" We got an order that banned NGL from having teens on the platform. And by the way, we also prohibited NGL from making false claims that AI was going to keep kids safe. So we've been really proactive in not just telling companies, do a better job of telling parents how their kids are going to get harmed. We're telling companies, stop engaging in practices that harm kids and teens.
So what about when it comes to user-generated content and marketing related to that, when it comes to influencers and others where we're talking about age-restricted products and other content that kids and teenagers shouldn't be exposed to? Where do the FTC's powers come into line in that area? Because the agency has gone after various things around, deceptive marketing practices and various other things. When it comes to targeting youth in particular, and again, not maybe some of these companies, but it's influencers or others who may get paid through other means that are actually targeting young people.
Yeah, this is absolutely a big concern for us. We put out a report last year on what we called stealth advertising and how that can affect kids and teens. We're in court now against Meta, seeking to limit their ability to monetize data from kids and teens. And I think that underscores an important point that we are really trying to make. You can't separate, in my view, and I'm speaking for myself and not the commission, I should have said that. You can't separate the business model of major social media platforms from the downstream harms we're seeing facing kids and teens. What we know, and I thought the governor made this point really clearly, is that these companies have a strong incentive because of their behavioral advertising-based business model to keep kids on their platform as long as possible, to serve up content that keeps them hooked, maybe to give marketers an opportunity to sell products and services. One feature of our Epic lawsuit, for example, is that kids were racking up millions of dollars in unauthorized charges. So we are really trying to make clear through our enforcement, through our rulemaking, through our public reports, that the business model that is driving these platforms and has made them the most valuable companies in the world can't be separated from these downstream harms. To address these harms, you have to look upstream at the incentives that are driving them.
So what are the other tools that the agency needs then? Because you based the Fortnite action and the TikTok one as well based on the current COPA, the current Children Online Privacy Act, but it really only applies to kids up to 13. And as you said, when they go past that age, it doesn't make them immune to other harms that they could be exposed to online. We'll see where the Senate moved to expand the age range for those protections go. But what are the tools that you need, and are the states that are passing some of these age verification or age restriction rules, is something like that ideal for the agency to do its job in a more fulsome way?
So I really think the scale of this problem, which so many of our speakers have talked about so articulately, requires an all-hands-on-deck response. So yes, we would welcome legislation that Congress is considering around online safety and online privacy. And we're glad that Congress in bills like COSA and bills like ADPPA and APRA are entrusting the FTC to enforce these bills. We think that's a real vote of confidence. But I also welcome these state efforts. The fact is states are responding to a real mental health crisis facing kids and teens. There's something like 3 in 5 teen girls saying that they regularly feel depressed, Surgeon General putting out warnings. We're at an event sponsored by Philip Morris. It reminds me that in the 1990s, federal enforcers were pretty late in challenging the marketing of tobacco to kids. It was really states in the late 90s that took the lead, got the national multi-state tobacco settlement to really clean up a lot of the advertising around tobacco. We're now facing another market where products and services that threaten to addict kids, that threaten to harm kids. And to the extent that states are getting fed up with inaction by Congress and that they want to take their own action to better protect kids, we welcome that. We have actively intervened when tech companies try to use our work to block state action. For example, Google recently argued that a group of families in California suing for kids' privacy violations couldn't do so because of COPPA, the Children's Privacy Law. We said not so fast, that's not right. The court agreed with us. So we welcome action by states, and as you referenced, we are also using our own tools, in particular our prohibition on unfair or deceptive practices to better protect kids and teens. And I'll note that both actions I mentioned, Epic Fortnite, NGL, and many others, have gotten bipartisan support at the Commission. Tech companies who hope that they're going to get a reprieve after November from forceful action to protect kids and teens should think again.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the possible change in administration, because so much of the criticism from the tech industry has been on Chair Khan and her efforts on the antitrust front and on the enforcement front. Where do you see what's next for the FTC, and how do you balance sort of, working with companies to come up with some sort of settlement or compromise where you don't have to take it to court versus, going that route when the agency itself also has limited resources?
Well, we settle most of the cases we bring, and that's a good thing when we can get settlements and avoid litigation. But I think if you ask any defense lawyer who works with the FTC, they know we are not afraid to litigate. We're in litigation with Meta, with Amazon, with, you referenced TikTok. We're in litigation with some of the biggest companies in the world. And if we can't get the relief that we think is justified through negotiation, then we're not afraid to take them to court. And I don't think that's going to change depending on what happens in November. I think one of the things, Federal Trade Commission is a bipartisan commission, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. These are conservative Republicans. I think it's fair to say they have been very supportive, even of our most aggressive privacy actions. I mentioned the case over the summer about anonymous messaging. Both Republican commissioners issued statements, expressing views on how they might have approached the case slightly differently, but ultimately saying this was the right kind of case to bring, and that teens online need special protection and need the attention of the FTC. So I'm really proud, both at the FTC, that we're seeing such bipartisan support for our work, and around the country, you see really bold action to protect kids and teens in states like Utah. It's not just New York and California. It's red states, it's blue states, it's purple states, recognizing that there's a crisis and taking action to stop it. And I think that's really encouraging, and it means that this work is going to continue regardless of what happens in November.
So how do you see the balancing act between protecting youth and consumers in general when it comes to privacy and other related issues, given some of these age verification, age requirement rules require inputting, personal identifiable information, but then sort of the broader picture of, whether any of these regulations or enforcement actions have unintended consequences when it comes to, stifling innovation or some of the positive ways that young people can benefit from having access to some of these platforms.
So there's no doubt that there are real trade-offs here that we have to take seriously and that policymakers need to take seriously. But unfortunately, some of the innovation we've seen is how to evade existing protections for kids and teens. So, when I think about kids and teens online and some of the issues you raise, I think there are kind of three principles that underscore that point. First, and we hear from tech companies all the time, from platforms all the time, well, we don't know if there are kids on the platform. It's, gambling on the premises. They claim they have no idea to us. And then they turn around and tell their advertisers, tell their shareholders that they can reach 45-year-old nurses in Toledo, Ohio with precision, that they can reach 30-year-old churchgoers in Topeka, Kansas with precision. Yet somehow, if you're 12 instead of 14, they have no idea who you are, what you're doing there. So part of this is companies that are willfully blind to the presence of children on the platform. A, if they think that that's going to get them out of COPPA liability, they're wrong. B, it's the wrong thing to do. And there wouldn't be so much bipartisan anger at these firms if they were more responsible. So we don't want to see this willful blindness. Two, speaking of innovation, one of the things we alleged in the TikTok lawsuit is that there were major bypasses around TikTok's loopholes around TikTok's age verification, age gating system. In particular, kids could log in through Google or Instagram without even going through it. So companies that know how profitable it is to have kids on the platform and are knowingly tolerating these bypasses around age verification, we're not going to look kindly on that. And the third point I'd want to make, and this goes back to my earlier point about AI, we are seeing a real rush across the market for companies to hoover up more data. Oftentimes they're changing the terms of service so they can train AI models, both on kids' data and on data across the board. And one of the messages we've made clear is that companies that collect data, certainly from kids, need to use it only for the purpose for which they collected it, and then they need to delete it. So we brought a case against Amazon last year for its Alexa product, it's Amazon Echoes and the like, for retaining kids' voice recordings and transcripts indefinitely to train their AI models. We said that was unlawful under the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. Companies can't keep data forever just because they want to train AI models. So I think when you talk about innovation, we have to go back to what kind of innovation do these companies' business models actually produce? Is it innovation to make products and services safer, more enjoyable, or is it to make them harmful and addictive? And those are difficult lines to cross, but I do have real worries that with the business models we have in place, the incentives have not been positive.
Well, we're all out of time. We'll definitely be watching what the FTC does next on this front. Thank you so much, Sam.
Excellent. Thank you. It's good talking to you.
Please welcome back Semafor's GM and Global Head of Public Affairs, Bennett Richardson.
Thanks so much, everybody. What a great conversation. Thank you so much to all of our speakers for joining us. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and thanks again to PMI for their support of today's event. We have a full slate of events this September. I wanted to put 3 on your radar for 2 weeks from now. On the 17th, on Tuesday, we'll be hosting Powering the Next Era of American Energy back here Tuesday morning. The following day, Wednesday the 18th in the evening, we'll have an interview with Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. Kadia Goba, our star congressional reporter, will sit down with former Speaker Pelosi on the 18th. And on the 19th, back here in the morning, Thursdays from now, I'll be hosting Betting on the Future of U.S. Gaming. So 3 great events 2 weeks from now, and then we'll have a full slate the following week down in New York for the UN General Assembly and Climate Week. So I hope you all can join us for some of those. Thank you again for joining us today. Have a great one. Bye.